Hello, Peter.
Hello, Ren.
You are a philosophical practitioner from Holland and you do all kinds of philosophical practice, for example.
Yes, I'm in philosophical practice since 2007 and my practice is harbored in Rotterdam, city of Rotterdam. And I do different activities like teaching, mainly based on Socratic dialogue. I do individual one-to-one philosophical consultations and I do philosophical city walks.
Now, you have two kinds of education, on the one, or
Yes.
three maybe. On the one hand, you have a degree in philosophy and you do philosophical practice. But on the other hand, even before you started with philosophy, you had medical education with an emphasis on psychology.
Yes.
How does philosophical practice relate to psychology? Do they
Yes.
clash? Do they interact? What is the relationship between these two?
Yes, so I started out studying medicine, also in an attempt to learn about myself by helping the other, you might say. And because of my special interest in mental phenomena, after graduating in medicine, I took trainings in psychotherapy. But while on the other hand, I was studying philosophy. But in psychotherapy, I got disappointed by the way to work, you might say, because I experienced that the clients were rather rigidly forced into to a method and were reproduced, you might say, as the product of a method. 6 sessions, such and such, 6 sessions, such and such. You know, that is you might say, the style of working in the Netherlands at the moment. Actually philosophizing and aimed at creating meaning for a person in his or her life was for me the most satisfying way to do it. Mm-hmm. And also seemed very satisfying for clients, but it was not according to the method what you were supposed to do.
Okay.
So that made me, you might say, break out into philosophical practice, where there is much more freedom, and you might say that my philosophical practice is aimed at meaning theory, so at discussing meaning in relationships, in work, in all kinds of situations.
Okay.
For persons in contemporary society.
Okay, so what I hear from you is that one difference between psychotherapy and philosophical practice is that philosophical practice is open, it's open-ended, it's not bound by a specific method,
right.
As opposed to psychology, which is.
Right.
But let me press on.
Right.
Not every open conversation is necessarily philosophical. My conversation
right.
with my hairdresser is also open.
Right.
So
right.
Can you explain a bit more? When does the conversation or the consultation turn into philosophical?
Yes. Well, basically when there is a philosophical idea in mind. And then I mean a common mind. So both of the philosopher that's doing the consultations as in the mind of the client. And now for usually the client, not being trained in philosophy, you might say in the beginning of the philosophical consultation or the series of consultation, that kind of idea is not clear. It's not clear et distinct, as Descartes should have said it. But I believe in the idea of an inner philosophy. It's in the client, and in the dialogue, we're trying to, might say, bring that inner philosopher out, as it is sometimes said. But I would say we bring the philosophical idea out. We make it clear et distinct, so that the person can use it in her life in different ways, as guidance or as pièce de résistance, as something to reflect on, or something to act according to. So that is, I think, the main purpose of that dialogue, a philosophical idea. And we can, and now you might ask, why is it philosophical? I think that's our expertise as philosophers doing it. We can relate the idea to the history of philosophy and see, this is an idea that we can not always place with a philosopher, but it has been discussed since Plato or in Eastern philosophy for a long time, and it's called this and that.
Okay, so articulating ideas, exploring ideas is the field of philosophical practice, as opposed to psychology, which deals with what would you say?
So you might say basically emotions. And I think if philosophy is applied, because there are a lot of psychological practices applying philosophical ideas, you might say, think of the existential therapy or rational emotive therapy. They are really based also on philosophy, you might say, but then they use philosophy in a limited way. It's just one philosophy, existential philosophy, where there are many more philosophical ideas, you might say, so they're not open to the rest. Or in rational emotive therapy, it's aimed at modifying emotions, you might say, while I think in philosophy, it's not aimed at that effect, it can be aimed at truth or at beauty, and not necessarily at changing behavior or emotions, which of course can be an effect, but not an effect that we aim at.
Does this mean that if we look at 5 or 10 minutes of a consultation, we can say that's a philosophical moment as opposed to a psychological moment, or vice versa?
Yes. So that's also one of my important exercises in the trainings that I do, to discover something what I would call the philosophical diagnosis. And the philosophical diagnosis is exactly the identification of philosophical content in the speech, actions, or behavior of the life of the client. The philosophical content that is created during the interaction with the philosopher, or that not created, but that becomes more clear and distinct in the interaction with the philosophical consultant.
So this is what you call the inner philosopher, or the inner idea. What exactly, I'm fascinated by this notion of inner philosopher. What does it mean that in some hidden, implicit way we have a philosophical idea?
Well, it means, you might say, that I think of philosophy as a general frame of reference for the mind. So it's inescapable that in someone there is a philosophical element or idea, but it's not clear, not explicitly there. And first step, of course, is to make it explicit. If someone consults a philosophical counselor. And then, because of the dialogue, I think the person also learns to philosophize and can go on herself in working with that idea. That's also, of course, an important element of philosophical practice. In a free dialogue, an outer dialogue is transmitted to an inner dialogue. So the inner philosopher is then both the idea as the working with that idea.
I understand. Let me try to construct a specific example to make it clear. Imagine that in the course of work with you, whether in a group or individual consultation, or maybe in a walk, I tell you about my relationship with my wife or girlfriend, and let's say that I'm talking about a misunderstanding. Okay, I'm telling you that there was some misunderstanding. I thought that she was criticizing me. She really didn't intend, something of that sort. What philosophically can be done with that? What is the implicit idea, or am I asking the wrong question?
No, it's good to work with an example. But first I would try to listen to it and distinguish the elements of being, doing, or having. So, and I think that is the first idea of the diagnosis. The diagnosis is dimensional. So all three of them should be in it. And I would, by questioning you, explore which of the elements are involved in that mistaken idea in your relationship. Is it the way you are? Is it the way you behave? You might say, your actions. Or is it the ideas that you have? Is it a kind of mistake? Is it kind of, let's say, a problem of having a thought? And that would be actually the first step of such a problem. So it's not like a psychologist might already maybe have a diagnosis and determine it, but for me it's open. And I would explore it by questioning in order to, but with the dimensions of being, doing, having in mind.
And what is the idea or the implicit idea, the hidden idea or philosophy that is maybe related to that example?
That's not determined beforehand.
I know.
That's something to be discovered. But
Sure.
I think the first hidden idea, because these are the categories of relating to Sartre, you might say, is indeed that it's related to being, doing, and having.
But can you give an example? Let's say that we are past 2 hours or 3 hours of talking. What might be an example of an implicit idea?
Well, it might be that this specific example, because I don't like to talk about problems, but this example is related to the idea of being in the world. That mistakes are caused by you being in yourself instead of being in the world with your partner, and that would be something, an existential theme, you might say, underneath in being. It might also be related to doing, in a sense that you're not applying, let's say, the correct ethical principles, or the ethical principles that apply to your situation, to the situation with your partner. So then we explore underlying principles. What is it? Are you trying to be good to her, nice to her? Are you trying to do all kind of different things? What is it based on? I call that foundational themes. Or it might be a kind of logical problem, that you don't understand the words of your partner, you know, and then you give wrong answers, you might say. So an exact, that we can logically analyze it, and then it would be applied to having certain ideas that are not, you might say, logically sound. So that would be the possibilities of the outcome of such a theme that I actually you might imagine this is a quite common theme in philosophical consultations. Yeah.
And is it a possibility? Do you sometimes use ideas from the past of past philosophers in an explicit way? So you might say, you might bring into the conversation,
Yes.
I don't know, South or somebody?
Yeah, I do. But it depends, of course, on the situation, on the level of education, because indeed now in Holland a lot of people come to philosophical consultation because they already have some philosophical background, some ideas, some intuition that philosophy is in their life, and they want to make it explicit, and so sometimes you can refer, but it's not necessarily that you have to do that. So it's not an aim to say, you're like a Cartesian, or you're like Plato, or you're like this, but it can be done, and then it becomes a kind of bibliotherapy, you might say, because then sometimes you can even say, all right, now your thought is so clear that I can give you a short piece of text, you read it, and you come back and we discuss it. That's sometimes also the way I work, yes.
And given that philosophy is an open investigation of ideas with not necessarily pragmatic goals,
right,
and psychology is a more pragmatically oriented investigation of emotions or psychological powers, is there a way to combine them?
Well, no, at the moment I don't see a way to combine them because of my education in psychotherapy. I always can make a very sharp distinction between psychology and philosophy. So during the consultation, I sometimes can correct myself and think, no, now I go into interpretations, and the interpretations might lead to something about the personality that looks very much like psychology, or now I'm using some kind of ways to deal with emotions. So now I'm practicing psychology, and then I try to block myself off and go back to philosophy again, which means Socratic questioning, the very fundamental, asking very fundamental, open questions, and then see how the person reacts to that, and see if we can discover philosophical ideas in the speech.
Okay. Well, that's quite enlightening. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, thank you for this interview, Ron.